A billionaire brought a homeless woman to his ex's wedding. What happened left everyone speechless. Hello, everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our new dramatic stories. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more cinematic stories that touch the heart. Your support truly means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us get back to our main character. Rain drizzled over the marble steps of the Grand Plaza Hotel, turning the city lights into blurred streaks of gold and silver. Inside, laughter echoed beneath chandeliers as 100 guests waited for the wedding ceremony to begin. At the back of the hall, Ethan Cole, a billionaire in a perfectly tailored black suit, sat alone. His expression was calm, almost unreadable, but his hand clenched around the edge of his champagne glass. Across the room stood his ex-fiancée, radiant in white, laughing in the arms of another man. Every flash of a camera felt like another nail in the coffin of his pride. Ethan had told himself he did not care. He had told himself he had moved on. But when the officiant began the vows, something inside him broke. The sound of polite applause hit like thunder. He needed to breathe. He needed to get out. He pushed through the revolving doors and stepped into the cold night. The rain had become heavier, splashing against the concrete, soaking his expensive shoes. That was when he saw her. A young woman huddled beneath the awning, her hair dripping, her thin sweater clinging to her shoulders. She held a cardboard cup in her hands, not for coffee, but for warmth. Her name was Lila, though he did not know it yet. For a moment, their eyes met. Her gaze was wary but steady, the kind of look that came from someone who had been invisible for too long. Ethan hesitated. Then, in a voice low and deliberate, he said, "Do you own a dress?" She blinked, confused. "Excuse me?" He took a slow breath, his jaw tightening. "I need a date. Right now. I will pay you. Enough to get a roof over your head." Lila stared at him like he was insane. "You are asking a stranger out here to be your date? To what, exactly?" "The wedding inside," he replied, glancing back at the glittering hall behind the glass doors. "My ex-fiancée's wedding?" A short laugh escaped her lips. "That sounds like a bad idea." Ethan gave a thin smile. "It probably is." He removed his suit jacket and draped it over her shoulders. The warmth startled her. His cologne clean, sharp, like rain on steel wrapped around her. "I will pay you for your time," he added. "Just for tonight. Pretend to be my date. No strings attached." She looked down at the jacket, then up at the man whose eyes carried more exhaustion than arrogance. Something in his voice, something human, made her hesitate. "Fine," she said quietly. "Just tonight." Ethan nodded once, motioning toward the limousine waiting by the curb. "Then let us make an entrance they will never forget." As the car door closed behind them, the city lights blurred through the window. Inside the hotel, the music played on, unaware that the next few minutes would silence the entire room. Because when the billionaire walked back into his ex-fiancée's wedding arm in arm, with a homeless woman in his jacket, the night would change forever. Rain still shimmered on the limousine windows as it glided through the city streets. Inside, silence filled the air. Lila sat stiffly beside Ethan, clutching his jacket around her like armor. The city lights reflected in her eyes, small and uncertain. She could not remember the last time she had been inside a car this clean, this quiet, this far from the noise of survival. Her fingers brushed against the seat's soft leather, almost afraid to leave a mark. Ethan glanced at her but said nothing. He was lost in thought, the rhythm of the rain echoing the pulse in his temples. For a man who owned half the skyline, he looked strangely fragile. When the car stopped in front of a designer boutique still glowing after hours, she frowned. "Why are we here?" "You need a dress," he said simply. Inside, the staff recognized him immediately. One call, and the boutique came alive. Racks opened, dresses appeared. The clerk's polite smile faltered only briefly when she saw Lila's worn sneakers and tangled hair. Ethan's look silenced her. Within minutes, a gown of soft silver satin was draped over Lila's arms. She stared at it as though it belonged to another world. "I cannot wear this," she whispered. "You can," Ethan said, "and you will." When she stepped out of the dressing room, the transformation was breathtaking. The fabric shimmered like liquid light, falling perfectly against her shoulders. A stylist pinned up her hair, leaving a few curls to frame her face. Someone handed her a pair of heels that fit as if they had been waiting for her. Ethan turned when he heard her steps. For a moment, the cynical smirk he had worn all evening vanished. She looked nothing like the girl he had met under the awning. She looked like a secret the world had forgotten to see. "Do I look ridiculous?" she asked, half smiling, half afraid. He shook his head slowly. "You look perfect." When they returned to the hotel, the music had changed to a slow waltz. The ballroom glowed beneath golden light. Heads turned the moment Ethan walked in with Lila on his arm. The murmurs were instant and sharp. "Who is she?" someone whispered. "Where did he find her?" Ethan ignored them all. His ex, now standing with her new husband near the grand piano, froze when she saw him. The smile on her face faltered. "Ethan," she said sweetly, approaching. "You came. I did not think you would." He smiled politely. "I would never miss your big day." Her gaze slid to Lila, scanning her from head to toe. "And this must be your new friend?" Lila felt the weight of every stare. The music, the perfume, the diamonds. They all pressed against her like a wall she did not belong behind. But she lifted her chin and offered her hand. "Lila," she said softly, "it is lovely to meet you." The ex's smile tightened. "Of course." Ethan's voice cut through the tension. "We were just about to get a drink." He guided Lila toward the bar, his hand steady on her back. "You handled that perfectly," he said under his breath. "I have been humiliated before," she replied quietly. That was nothing new. Ethan looked at her then, really looked at her, and for the first time saw the quiet resilience in her eyes. She was not a woman broken by the world. She was one who had learned to stand up after every fall. As the night went on, guests kept watching them. Whispers trailed behind wherever they moved. A few old acquaintances approached Ethan, each offering subtle jabs disguised as jokes. "So this is the new love interest?" One man laughed. "You certainly traded down." Lila's hands trembled on her glass. But before she could respond, Ethan spoke. "You are right," he said evenly. "She is not like anyone here. That is exactly the point." The man blinked, taken aback. Lila's lips parted, surprised by the unexpected defense. Later, as the lights dimmed and the first dance began, Lila excused herself. She needed air. The marble hallway outside was quiet, a world away from the noise of wealth and envy. She leaned against the wall, the weight of the evening pressing down on her. Ethan found her there a few minutes later. "Are you all right?" She nodded faintly. "You do not have to pretend anymore. You made your point." He frowned. "What do you mean?" She met his gaze. "You brought me here to prove something. Maybe to her. Maybe to yourself. I get it. I did my part." Ethan exhaled slowly, realizing how small his plan suddenly seemed. He had wanted revenge, or maybe vindication. But standing there, watching her in the soft hallway light, he felt something heavier, something real. "Maybe I made the wrong point," he said quietly. Lila handed him back his jacket. "Your world is not mine, Ethan." He looked down at the jacket, then at her, and for a moment neither spoke. The silence between them was softer than words. Back in the ballroom, music and laughter swelled again. But for Ethan, the night had already changed. The woman he had brought to make others speechless had somehow left him unable to speak at all. The next morning, sunlight crept through the glass walls of Ethan's penthouse, reflecting off the polished marble floors. He had not slept. The night replayed in his mind again and again the whispers, the stares, and Lila's voice when she said, "Your world is not mine." He had left her a hotel suite for the night, a quiet space far from the chaos of the ballroom. But when his assistant checked that morning, she was gone. The bed was made, the borrowed gown neatly folded on the chair, and the silver necklace he had lent her lay beside a handwritten note. "Thank you for letting me pretend. I hope you find what you were really looking for." Ethan stared at the note for a long time. He should have felt relieved. The deal was over. No headlines, no scandal. Yet something hollow spread through his chest, as if she had taken the air with her when she left. By noon, he was back at his office, staring out at the skyline that once made him feel powerful. His phone buzzed messages from the press, from old friends, from people who thought they knew him. Who was she? They asked. Is it true? He ignored them all. But one message caught his eye. It was a link to an online article. A photo of Lila leaving the hotel alone in the early morning light was plastered across the headline. Billionaire's mystery date was a homeless woman, scandal, or sympathy. The comments were cruel. Words like charity case, publicity stunt, and fake girlfriend filled the page. Ethan felt a rush of anger tighten in his throat. None of them knew her. None of them had seen the strength in her eyes or the quiet dignity in her voice. He slammed the laptop shut and stood abruptly. He had spent years controlling narratives, manipulating markets, and shaping headlines. But this time, he would not let anyone else define the story. By evening, his car pulled up outside a small community shelter on the east side of the city. The building was old, the sign faded, but the warmth inside was unmistakable. He found her there, Lila, serving soup to a line of people who looked just as lost as she once had been. She froze when she saw him, her ladle still in midair. "Ethan," she said quietly, "you should not be here." "I had to see you," he said. "You left without saying goodbye." "You did not need a goodbye," she replied. "You needed an audience. You got one." "That is not true," he said, stepping closer. "You think I brought you there to embarrass you, but the only person who was humbled that night was me." She shook her head. "You do not understand. People like you can walk away from humiliation. People like me live in it." Ethan's voice softened. "Then let me help change that." Lila sighed, setting the ladle down. "You cannot buy respect, Ethan. Not for yourself, and not for me." He hesitated, searching for words that did not sound like pity. "I am not here to buy anything. I wanted you to know that what you said last night was right. My world is not yours, but it is emptier without you in it." The room fell silent around them, the clatter of dishes fading into the background. Lila looked at him for a long moment, unsure whether to believe him. She saw something in his eyes, genuine remorse, maybe even truth. Finally, she said, "If you really mean that, then prove it. Not with money, with something real." Ethan nodded slowly. "Then give me the chance to try." She turned back to the serving table, picking up the ladle again. "We will see," she murmured. As he stood there watching her, surrounded by the people she had chosen to serve instead of escape, Ethan realized what he had been missing all along. The night at the wedding had not been about revenge or image. It had been about finding someone who reminded him what it meant to be human. And this time, he was not going to let the world twist that truth. The following week passed in a blur of headlines and silence. Every news outlet kept replaying the photo of Ethan and Lila from the wedding night, twisting it into their own story. Some called it charity, others called it humiliation. For the first time in his life, Ethan Cole refused to issue a statement. Instead, he began to spend his days away from the boardrooms and cameras. He visited the same community shelter where Lila volunteered. At first, she did not speak to him. She simply continued serving food, folding blankets, and greeting the people who came through the door. But every day, he showed up again quietly, without his usual entourage, without the armor of power that once followed him everywhere. On the third day, she finally asked, "Why are you doing this?" Ethan handed her a box of donated supplies and said simply, "Because you said I should prove it." She gave him a long look, trying to decide if his sincerity was real or just another performance. But as the days turned into weeks, she saw that he stayed long after the cameras disappeared. He drove the delivery van, repaired broken shelves, and even joined the line of volunteers cleaning the kitchen floor. Once, when he tried to give a check to the shelter director, Lila stopped him. "No," she said firmly. "You are here to work, not to buy forgiveness." He smiled faintly. "Then I will earn it." His rage drowled in the santly. It was during one of those evenings, after everyone had left, that she found him sitting alone at one of the tables, sleeves rolled up, his hands covered in dust. "You know," she said softly, "you do not look much like a billionaire right now." He laughed under his breath. "Maybe that is a good thing." She hesitated, then sat across from him. For the first time, the distance between them felt smaller. The world outside might still whisper, but here, under the dim fluorescent lights of a shelter kitchen, there was only honesty. "Do you ever miss it?" she asked. "The parties, the suits, the attention?" Ethan shook his head. "I miss believing it mattered." Her eyes softened. "You are learning." He met her gaze, holding it this time. "And what about you? What do you miss?" She smiled sadly. "A place to belong." The words lingered between them like a fragile secret. Neither spoke for a moment. Then Ethan reached into his pocket and placed the silver necklace, the one she had returned, on the table. It gleamed faintly under the light. I kept it, he said quietly. Not because it was expensive, because it reminded me of the only night I stopped pretending. Lila looked down at it, her throat tightening. That night nearly destroyed me, Ethan. I know, he replied. That is why I want to make it right. She looked at him again, her voice trembling between forgiveness and fear. And what does making it right mean to you? He took a breath. It means facing them. All of them. Not hiding behind money or silence. A few days later, he proved that he meant it. When a reporter from a national network showed up at the shelter, asking for a comment about the scandal, Ethan stepped forward before Lila could answer. Cameras turned toward him, microphones raised. She is not a charity project, he said firmly. She is the reason I remembered what decency looks like. She does not owe me anything, but I owe her the truth. The room fell silent. For once, the world saw a man not defending his image, but defending someone else's dignity. Lila stood frozen, her hands trembling as flashes of cameras filled the room. Ethan looked at her one last time, his expression steady. If they want a story, he said softly, let it be this one. That night, when the shelter emptied and the noise faded, Lila found him sitting on the steps outside, looking up at the dark sky. She sat beside him quietly. You did not have to do that, she whispered. He turned to her, his voice low. Yes, I did. For the first time, she smiled without hesitation. Maybe now we can both stop pretending. He nodded slowly. Maybe we can finally start living. It is innate truth, Stafford it. The next morning, sunlight poured over the city skyline, washing the glass towers in soft gold. Ethan woke for the first time in weeks without the weight of headlines pressing on his chest. The television in his penthouse was still playing the news, his own face frozen on the screen. The anchor's voice echoed through the empty room. In an unexpected turn, billionaire Ethan Cole publicly defended a homeless woman at a charity shelter yesterday, calling her his inspiration and the symbol of true integrity. He turned the television off. He had said what needed to be said. The rest no longer mattered. Meanwhile, across town, Lila walked through the morning crowd with a newspaper tucked under her arm. Her picture was on the front page again, but this time, the words were different. The woman who made a billionaire remember what kindness means. There's Zistjan. She stopped at a corner cafe, ordered a small coffee, and sat by the window. For the first time, people were not whispering behind her back. They were smiling. The barista slipped a muffin into her bag and said softly, "On the house, for what you did." Lila smiled faintly, though she was not sure what she had really done. All she had wanted was to survive another day. But somehow, her honesty had started something larger, something that even wealth could not buy. That afternoon, she returned to the shelter, the familiar scent of coffee and detergent wrapping around her like home. The director handed her a small envelope. Inside was a letter written in neat, steady handwriting. You once told me that people like you live in humiliation. I used to live in pride. I think we both deserve better. Meet me where we first met under the awning of the Grand Plaza, tonight at 8. Their levered Tech 9, her heart skipped a beat. She folded the letter carefully and pressed it to her chest. When evening came, rain returned to the city, soft and silver, just like that night. Lila stood under the same awning, the same chill in the air, but this time she was not shivering. She heard footsteps behind her and turned. Ethan was there, holding an umbrella in one hand and a small box in the other. You came, he said quietly. I almost did not, she replied, half smiling. I was afraid this was another performance. He shook his head. No more performances, no more pretending. He opened the box and revealed the silver necklace, now engraved with a single word. Dignity. Lila's eyes softened. Why that word? Because it is what you gave me, he said, and what you never lost, even when the world tried to take it. For a moment, the noise of the city faded. The rain tapped softly on the umbrella above them. I am not offering a deal this time, Ethan said. No contracts, no conditions. I am asking for something real. I want to start again with you. Lila looked at him, searching for hesitation, but there was none. He was not the man from the ballroom anymore. He was human, imperfect, and finally honest. You really think two people from opposite worlds can make that work? She asked gently. He smiled. Maybe not in their world, but we can build our own. She laughed quietly, the sound bright and clean against the rain. Then I guess we both finally found a place to belong. Ethan placed the necklace around her neck, his fingers brushing her skin. The city lights reflected in her eyes, warm and steady. For the first time, there were no reporters, no crowds, no contracts. Only two people standing in the rain, free from everything they used to hide behind. He reached out his hand. "Walk with me?" She nodded. "Only if we are walking forward." They stepped out from under the awning together, into the rain that had once brought them together. And as they disappeared down the quiet street, it was clear the story that began as a lie had finally become something real. Love built not on wealth, but on truth. Weeks later, spring arrived in the city, soft and full of light. The chaos around Ethan and Lila's story had finally begun to fade. The newspapers moved on, the cameras found other scandals to chase, and for the first time, both of them were allowed to breathe. Ethan spent most mornings at the shelter now, not as a benefactor, but as part of the team. He had learned how to make coffee in bulk, fix leaky faucets, and even patch cracked tiles with the same precision he once used to sign multi-million-dollar contracts. The staff had stopped treating him like a guest. He had become one of them. Lila, meanwhile, had begun helping the shelter's director start a new program to train and employ people struggling to rebuild their lives. Her calm persistence gave others hope. Watching her lead reminded Ethan of the strength he had seen that night under the hotel awning, the strength he had once mistaken for defiance. One evening, after everyone had gone home, Lila found Ethan sitting at one of the tables, surrounded by scattered papers and a tired smile. "You should go home," she said softly. "You have done enough for one day." He looked up at her and smiled faintly. "You keep saying that, but it never feels like enough. This free my dap." She sat across from him, glancing at the papers. "What is all this?" "Blueprints," he said. "I bought the empty building next door. I want to expand the shelter, create workshops, classrooms, maybe even housing for families trying to get back on their feet." Lila blinked, stunned. "Ethan, that is huge. That is going to take millions." He nodded. "Then it is a good thing I know someone with a little money to spare." She laughed softly. "You really think people will support this?" He leaned back, his eyes steady on hers. "They will if you are the one leading it." She frowned. "Me?" "Yes," he said simply. "You know these people. You understand what they need. They will trust you in ways they will never trust me." For a moment, she could not speak. The idea terrified her, but it also filled her with something she had not felt in a long time: purpose. That night, as they walked out together, the city air was warm, scented with rain and blooming trees. Lila looked at him quietly. "Why are you doing all this, Ethan?" He stopped, meeting her gaze. "Because you once told me that my world was not yours. I want to build one we can share." Before she could answer, a car pulled up at the curb. A woman stepped out, elegant, poised, and immediately familiar. It was Ethan's ex-fiancée, Claire. "Ethan," she said sharply, "you have not returned my calls. We need to talk." Lila stiffened, the old ache in her chest returning for the first time in weeks. Ethan's tone stayed calm. "There is nothing to talk about." Claire crossed her arms. "You are throwing your reputation away for this experiment. Do you have any idea what people are saying?" Ethan's expression hardened. "Yes. They are saying that I finally learned how to live with integrity. I am fine with that." Claire's voice dropped. "You are making a mistake." He smiled, a calmness in his eyes she had never seen before. "You said the same thing when you left me. Turns out, that mistake led me right where I was supposed to be." Claire's jaw tightened, but she said nothing more. She got back into the car and drove away, her taillights fading into the dark. Lila exhaled slowly. "You did not have to do that in front of her." "I did," he replied, "because I want her and everyone else to know that you are not part of my past. You are my future." For a moment, Lila could only stare at him. The sincerity in his voice left no room for doubt. The next morning, word spread about Ethan's new project. Reporters arrived at the construction site, expecting another PR stunt, but instead found volunteers from across the city: students, small business owners, and people who had once slept on the shelter's floor, all working side by side. Ethan stood beside Lila as the cameras rolled. When one journalist asked, "Mr. Cole, is this another publicity move?" he smiled faintly. "No," he said. "This is redemption." He paused, glancing at Lila. And it started with a woman who taught me that worth is not measured in wealth, but in what you give when you have nothing. Lila felt tears sting her eyes. She stepped forward, holding the microphone for a moment. "This is not his story," she said quietly. "It is ours, the story of anyone who has ever been invisible and still chose to be kind." The crowd fell silent. For a brief second, the noise of the world faded, replaced by the quiet sound of people believing again. That night, when the city lights shimmered across the river, Ethan and Lila stood on the half-built balcony of what would soon become the new shelter. Wind swept through the open space, carrying the scent of wet concrete and new beginnings. Lila leaned her head against his shoulder. "You really think this will work?" He smiled, his voice soft. "It already is." For the first time, the billionaire and the woman who once slept under bridges were exactly where they belonged, side by side, building something real out of everything the world had once tried to break. A few months later, the new shelter was nearly complete. The sound of drills and laughter filled the air as volunteers painted the final walls. The building that once stood empty and forgotten was now alive, covered in color, music, and hope. Ethan stood on the second-floor balcony, looking down at the courtyard where Lila organized supplies and directed volunteers. She was in her element, confident, strong, and radiant in a way that had nothing to do with appearance and everything to do with purpose. He had seen her grow from a woman surviving day to day into a leader who inspired everyone around her. But peace never lasted long. That evening, Ethan received an unexpected call from his company's board. The voice on the other end was cold and formal. "Mr. Cole, we need to discuss the current financial implications of your charity involvement." He knew what that meant. They were losing patience. Investors were questioning his decisions, worried that his focus on social projects made him look unstable. The word burned in his chest. That night, he drove to the construction site alone. The city lights flickered on the windshield, blurring like ghosts of his former life. When he arrived, Lila was still there, reviewing paperwork under a single hanging bulb. She looked up when he entered, her smile fading when she saw his expression. "What happened?" she asked. Ethan took a deep breath. "The board wants me to step down." Her eyes widened. "Because of this place?" "Because of everything," he said quietly. "They think I have lost control. They think helping people like this makes me look weak." Lila set the papers aside, her voice firm. "And what do you think?" He looked at her for a long moment. "I think for the first time in my life, I am doing something that actually matters. But if I lose the company, I lose the funding for this shelter. For everything we are building. And any every one CISO that Bellity Dan helped later decatable." She walked closer, her tone steady. "You do not need their permission to keep doing good. You have already proven that." Ethan ran a hand through his hair, frustration tightening his jaw. "It is not that simple, Lila. There are contracts, responsibilities, hundreds of employees who depend on me. If I fight this, I could lose everything." She met his gaze. "Then maybe losing everything is what it takes to start over." The words hit him harder than she realized. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Rain began tapping softly against the windows, the same rhythm that had followed them from the beginning. "I do not want you to lose what you built," she said finally. "But I also do not want you to lose yourself again." Ethan stepped closer. "I will not. Not this time." There is all of which see content. The next morning, he walked into the company headquarters, wearing the same determination he once reserved for billion-dollar deals. Cameras flashed, reporters called his name, but he ignored them all. In the boardroom, faces turned as he entered. One of the executives began, "Ethan, this is not personal. We just believe." He interrupted calmly. "You believe that compassion is bad for business. You believe that dignity and profit cannot exist together. You are wrong." Murmurs rippled through the room. He continued, his voice steady. "If running this company means turning my back on the people who made me human again, then I would rather walk away." He signed the resignation letter on the table, placed his pen down, and walked out without another word. When he arrived back at the shelter that afternoon, Lila was outside, greeting volunteers. She saw the look on his face and already knew. "You did it," she whispered. "I did," he said quietly. "I do not know what comes next, but I know it will be honest." She smiled through tears. "Then, it will be enough." For the first time in his life, Ethan Cole was free. No boardrooms, no contracts, no masks. Only a man who had traded power for peace and a woman who had taught him what it truly meant to build something real. 2 months later, the shelter's grand opening finally arrived. The once abandoned building now stood tall, painted in warm tones of cream and gold, its windows glowing like a promise in the evening light. Crowds gathered outside, a mix of reporters, city officials, and people who had once stood in those same soup lines. It was not a charity event, it was a celebration of second chances. Ethan stood quietly at the edge of the courtyard, dressed not in a designer suit but in a simple white shirt with rolled-up sleeves. The man who had once hidden behind money now looked lighter, grounded, and free. Lila moved through the crowd, greeting guests with her usual calm grace. When their eyes met, she smiled, the kind of smile that said everything words could not. The mayor gave a short speech, praising the project's mission to provide housing, job training, and education for the homeless. Cameras flashed as Ethan and Lila stood together, ready to cut the ribbon. But before they did, Ethan stepped forward, holding up a hand for silence. "I know tonight is supposed to be about a building," he said, his voice clear, steady. "But for me, it is about a person. A woman who showed me that dignity does not come from wealth, but from how you treat the people who have none. This little shid my gown." He turned toward Lila. "When I met her, she had nothing but courage. I had everything but heart. She taught me the difference between living and existing." The crowd went silent. Lila's eyes shimmered under the lights, unsure whether to laugh or cry. Ethan reached into his pocket and pulled out the silver necklace she had worn that night in the rain, the one engraved with the word dignity. It caught the light as he lifted it. "I gave this back to her once," he said softly, "but tonight I want to give her something more." He stepped closer, his voice trembling slightly now. "Lila, this shelter is not my redemption. It is ours. You rebuilt it. You rebuilt me. And you reminded me that love is not a transaction, it is a commitment. So if you will let me, I want to spend the rest of my life proving that." Gasps rippled through the crowd as he opened a small box in his hand. Inside was a simple gold ring. No diamonds, no extravagance, just sincerity. Lila covered her mouth, tears spilling freely. "Ethan," she whispered, "you do not have to do this here." He smiled. "I want to, because for the first time I am not afraid of being seen for who I really am." The crowd began to applaud softly, then louder as Lila nodded through tears. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking. "Yes, I will." Ethan slipped the ring onto her finger, and the courtyard erupted in cheers. The volunteers, the guests, even the reporters clapped not for the proposal, but for what it represented. Two people who had come from opposite worlds had found common ground not through wealth, but through worth. As the music began and the lights dimmed, Lila leaned against Ethan's shoulder. "You realize," she said quietly, "we just turned a charity opening into a love story." He laughed softly. "Then let it be the right kind of story." She tilted her head toward him. "And what kind is that?" "The kind," he said, "where both people walk away equal." The crowd continued to celebrate, the sound of laughter mingling with the hum of the city night. Above them, the shelter's sign flickered to life, glowing bright against the skyline. "The haven where dignity begins." Ethan wrapped his arm around Lila as they watched the lights shine. For once, there was no pretense, no performance, only peace. The man who had once tried to buy love had finally learned that the most valuable thing in the world could never be purchased. It could only be earned one act of kindness, one moment of honesty, and one shared heartbeat at a time. A few weeks after the grand opening, life at the Haven settled into a quiet rhythm. The building that had once echoed with hammers and construction dust was now alive with conversation, laughter, and music from the small classroom upstairs. The scent of coffee drifted from the kitchen each morning, and sunlight spilled through the tall windows, warming the tables where people now sat, writing job applications or sharing stories over breakfast. Ethan walked through the halls every day, greeting everyone by name. The volunteers still called him Mr. Cole out of habit, but he always corrected them gently. "It is just Ethan," he would say with a smile. The man who had once lived above the city now belonged completely to it. Lila ran the daily operations, her office tucked into the corner of the main floor. There was always a stack of paperwork on her desk, but the photo that stayed in the center never changed a picture of the shelter's opening night. Ethan's arm around her, both of them smiling as if they had finally arrived where they were meant to be. One evening, as the sun melted into the horizon, Lila stood by the large window overlooking the courtyard. The light turned the glass gold. She watched children playing by the fountain, a place that had once been broken concrete and silence. Ethan came up beside her, slipping his hand gently into hers. "They look happy," he said softly. "They are," she replied. "So are we." He smiled, watching the water shimmer in the fading light. "Do you ever think about that night? The wedding?" Lila laughed quietly. "You mean the night you decided to ruin your ex's big moment by bringing a complete stranger?" He chuckled. "I think about it every day. It was the worst decision of my life and somehow the best." She looked at him, her expression tender. "You were angry and lost. I was cold and desperate. We met in the middle of chaos, and somehow it became home." Ethan squeezed her hand. "I used to think success was about control, about never being vulnerable. But now I know it is about the moments you let someone see who you really are." They stood in silence for a while, the city glowing softly around them. A cool breeze carried the sound of laughter from outside. For the first time in years, Ethan felt completely still, no deals waiting, no headlines chasing, no ghosts of failure following him. Just life. "I have been thinking," he said finally, "about expanding the Haven, maybe opening one in every city where people need a second chance." Lila smiled. "That sounds like something the old Ethan would have said: big, ambitious, impossible." He grinned. "Maybe. But this time it is not about building an empire. It is about building hope." She nodded slowly. "Then we do it together." Seeing. As the sun disappeared and the first stars blinked to life, Ethan turned to her and said, "You know, I used to think my greatest achievement was my company." Lila raised an eyebrow. "And now?" He looked at her with a warmth that reached his voice. "Now I know it is you." She leaned her head against his shoulder, her voice soft. "You cannot own love, Ethan. You can only live it." "I know," he said, wrapping an arm around her. "And that is exactly what I plan to do." Outside, the lights of the Haven flickered brighter, illuminating the words painted across the entrance. "Where dignity begins, and commons probably oblige." And all day said. The camera of memory seemed to pull back two figures standing together at the window, their reflections framed by light and shadow. From a night of revenge to a lifetime of redemption, their story had come full circle. Ethan Cole, the billionaire who once measured worth in dollars, had finally discovered its truest meaning in compassion, in courage, and in a woman who taught him that love, like dignity, is never given. It is earned.